I watched the tow truck driver hook up my pontoon boat to his rig, while 3 HOA board members stood on the dock with their arms crossed like they had just won the lottery. What they didn't know was that I had been sitting on the most valuable secret in Pine Lake Estates for the past 6 months, and their smug faces were about to become a distant memory. My name is Zachary Ellis, and I had moved to Pine Lake Estates in northern Minnesota about 8 months ago. The community sat on the edge of a pristine lake with a private marina that served the 200 homes in the development. I'd bought a modest 3-bedroom house on Lakeview Drive, and the first thing I did after closing was purchase a beautiful 24-foot pontoon boat. Nothing fancy, but perfect for fishing and watching the sunset with a cold beer in hand. The trouble started 3 weeks ago when I came back from a weekend trip to Duluth. There was a bright orange violation notice zip-tied to my boat's steering wheel. The letter, printed on official HOA letterhead, stated that my pontoon exceeded the maximum length allowed for overnight docking at the marina. According to the notice, boats over 20 feet needed to be stored in one of the premium slips, which cost an additional $3,000 per year on top of my regular HOA fees. I had read through the entire covenant and bylaws when I bought the house. There was no mention of any length restriction for standard slips. I had specifically chosen a property with lake access and marina privileges because I loved boating. The whole reason I had moved to Pine Lake Estates was to enjoy the water without dealing with public boat launches and crowded lakes. The next day, I showed up at the HOA office in the community center. A woman named Patricia Winters sat behind the desk, her blonde hair styled in that classic suburban mom cut that somehow looks both expensive and dated. She was the vice president of the HOA board, and from what I had learned from my neighbors, she ran the place like her personal fiefdom. "Mr. Ellis, thank you for coming in," Patricia said, not looking up from her computer screen. "I assume you're here about the violation notice." "I am. There's nothing in the bylaws about boat length restrictions for standard slips." She finally looked at me, her smile tight and practiced. "The board voted on the new policy 3 months ago. All residents were notified via email." "I never received an email about this." "That's not our problem. The policy is in effect, and you have 14 days to either move your boat to a premium slip or remove it from the marina entirely." I kept my voice calm. "Can I see the meeting minutes from when this was voted on?" Patricia's smile faded. "Meeting minutes are available to board members only. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." Actually, according to Minnesota Statute 515 B.3118, all association records must be made available to homeowners upon reasonable request. Her face turned red. "Fine, I'll have them sent to you, but the policy stands. You have 14 days. I left the office knowing this was going to be a fight. What Patricia didn't know was that I had spent the last 20 years as a real estate attorney in Chicago before retiring early and moving to Minnesota. I knew HOA law inside and out, and something about this whole situation smelled wrong. The meeting minutes arrived in my email 2 days later, and they were exactly what I expected. The vote had taken place during a special board meeting that was never properly noticed to the community. According to Minnesota law, special meetings required at least 10 days written notice to all homeowners. The email notification had been sent out only 3 days before the meeting, and even that was questionable since dozens of residents, including myself, never received it. But I decided to dig deeper before playing my hand. I started talking to other boat owners at the marina. It turned out I wasn't the only one being targeted. 5 other homeowners had received similar violations. What they all had in common was that they were relatively new to the community and didn't have connections to the old guard who had been living there since the development opened 15 years ago. One of my neighbors, a retired teacher named George Hoffman, told me something interesting over beers on his deck. "You know those premium slips they want us to pay for? Patricia's brother owns the company that built them, cost the HOA $200,000, but somehow the contract was approved without competitive bidding." That was when I decided it was time to do some serious research. I went to the county courthouse in Grand Rapids and started pulling records. Property deeds, plat maps, easements, everything I could find related to Pine Lake Estates. What I discovered was better than I could have imagined. The development had been built in 2009, by a company called Northern Minnesota Properties, LLC. They had purchased a large tract of land that included lakefront property and had subdivided it into residential lots. However, the lakebed itself and a 20-foot strip along the shoreline had been retained by the original owner, a man named Walter Everett. The development company had negotiated a 99-year easement for the lakebed and shoreline, which allowed them to build the marina and give residents water access. I kept digging through the corporate records. Northern Minnesota Properties, LLC, had been dissolved in 2018. Walter Everett had died in 2020. His estate had been handled by a law firm in Minneapolis, and after following a complex trail of corporate transfers and estate sales, I discovered something remarkable. The lakebed and shoreline had been sold to a private investment company called Lakeshore Holdings, LLC, in 2021. I had almost glossed over the name until I checked the corporate registration. Lakeshore Holdings, LLC, was owned by my uncle, Raymond Ellis. I called Uncle Ray immediately. He was 82 years old and living in a retirement community in Florida. When I asked him about Lakeshore Holdings, he laughed. "Oh, that thing. Yeah, I bought that as an investment back when interest rates were low. Some lawyer told me it was a good deal. I've been getting easement payments from some HOA up there, but honestly, I forgot all about it. Why do you ask?" I explained the situation to him, and there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're kidding me? You actually live there?" "I do, and the HOA is trying to shake me down for extra fees on bogus violations." Uncle Ray chuckled. "Well, that's something. Listen, Zachary, I'm too old to deal with this stuff. You want the property? I'll sell it to you for what I paid. Consider it an early inheritance." We worked out the details over the next week. I paid Uncle Ray $45,000, which was actually below market value for the lakebed rights. The transfer was completed through a quiet title action to make sure everything was legally sound. By the end of the process, I owned the lakebed beneath the entire marina and the 20-foot shoreline strip that the entire community's lake access depended on. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to see how far the HOA would push things. The 14-day deadline came and went. On day 15, I got a certified letter informing me that my boat would be towed and impounded if I didn't comply within 72 hours. I ignored it. That's how I ended up watching the tow truck driver hook up my pontoon on a Tuesday morning in early June. Patricia was there, along with two other board members, Deborah Klein and Susan Carmichael. All three of them looked thrilled. "Mr. Ellis, you were warned multiple times," Patricia said as I walked down the dock. "The HOA has the authority to remove violations, and you will be billed for the towing and storage fees." "Is that so?" "It is. And if you continue to violate community standards, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property." I nodded slowly. "Patricia, can I ask you a question? Did you actually verify that the HOA owns the marina?" She blinked. "Of course we own it. It's part of the common elements." "Interesting, because I have the property records right here that say otherwise." I pulled out a folder from under my arm. "The lakebed and the shoreline access are actually private property held under easement by the HOA, and as of last week, I'm the owner of that property." The color drained from Patricia's face. "That's impossible." "It's not. I have the deed, the title insurance, and the survey. Every single boat slip in this marina is on property that I own. The HOA has an easement that allows residents to use the lake, but that easement has specific terms that the HOA is currently violating." Deborah stepped forward. "You're bluffing. The HOA has owned this marina for 15 years. "No, the HOA has had access rights for 15 years. There's a big difference. And according to the easement agreement, the HOA is required to maintain the marina in accordance with the original development plans and cannot implement discriminatory policies against residents. By creating this premium slip scheme and targeting specific homeowners, you've violated the easement terms." Susan looked nervous. "What does that mean?" "It means I can revoke the easement, which would shut down the marina and eliminate lake access for every home in Pine Lake Estates." Patricia's face went from white to red. "You can't do that. We'll sue you." "Go ahead. I've been a real estate attorney for 20 years. I know exactly what I can and cannot do, And right now, I'm telling that tow truck driver to unhook my boat. I walked over to the driver and handed him a $100 bill. Sorry for wasting your time. He looked at Patricia, who seemed frozen, then shrugged and started unhooking the pontoon. Lady already paid me, so I'm good either way. After he left, I turned back to the 3 board members. Here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to rescind this bogus boat length policy. Second, you're going to refund any premium slip fees that have been collected. Third, you're going to provide a full accounting of how that $200,000 Marina expansion was awarded to Patricia's brother, without competitive bidding. And fourth, you're going to call a special meeting and properly notice it this time so the entire community can vote on new board leadership. And if we don't? Patricia's voice was shaking with rage. Then I revoke the easement, and this marina becomes private property that only I can use. Every home in this community will lose water access, and property values will tank. I'm sure your neighbors would love to hear that you're the reason their homes are now worthless. I left them standing on the dock and went home. I knew Patricia wouldn't give up easily, but I had put her in an impossible position. If she fought me, she'd hurt every homeowner in the community, including herself. If she gave in, she'd have to admit she had been running a corrupt operation. 2 days later, I received an email from the HOA board announcing an emergency meeting. The notice went out to every homeowner with the full 10 days required by law. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the community center. In the meantime, I started hearing from other homeowners. Word had spread about my confrontation with Patricia, and people were asking questions. George Hoffman called me and said that at least 30 residents were planning to attend the meeting, which was unheard of. Usually, only the board members and maybe 5 other people showed up. I spent the intervening days preparing my case. I made copies of all the property records, the easement agreement, the meeting minutes showing the improper notice, and the contract with Patricia's brother's company. I also drafted a formal complaint about the HOA's violations of state law and the easement terms. The morning of the meeting, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Mr. Ellis, this is Daniel Winters. I'm Patricia's husband. I'd like to speak with you before the meeting today." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can we meet for coffee? There's a place in town called The Grind. How about 10 o'clock? I agreed, curious about what he wanted. The Grind was a small coffee shop on Main Street in Grand Rapids, about 15 minutes from Pine Lake Estates. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I won't waste your time. I know what Patricia has been doing with the HOA, and I know you have grounds to cause serious problems for everyone in the community." "Then why am I here?" "Because I want to help you. Patricia and I are getting divorced. Have been for the past 3 months, actually, but she didn't want anyone to know until after the election." "What election?" "She's planning to run for county commissioner next year. The whole HOA president thing is supposed to be her proving ground, showing she can manage a community budget and make tough decisions. Except she's been using it to line her pockets and settle petty scores." I sipped my coffee. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of covering for her. And because what she's doing is wrong. I can give you documents showing the kickback arrangement with her brother, bank records, emails, the whole thing. But I need something from you." "What's that?" "Protection. If this goes public and she gets charged with anything, I don't want to be dragged down with her. I had nothing to do with the HOA stuff. I work for a medical supply company and I'm gone 3 weeks out of every month. I just want a clean divorce and to move on with my life." I thought about it. I'm not looking to destroy people's lives. I just want the HOA to follow the law and stop harassing homeowners. If you can provide evidence of the corruption, I'll make sure it's clear you weren't involved. He slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. Emails between Patricia and her brother discussing the Marina contract, bank statements showing the payments, and text messages where she talks about targeting newer residents to push them toward the premium slips. It's all time-stamped and documented." I took the drive. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Patricia's going to fight this hard. She's already talking to a lawyer about suing you for interference with the HOA's operations. Let her try. I know more HOA lawyers than she's ever met, and they'll all tell her the same thing. She's on the wrong side of this. Daniel stood up and offered his hand. Good luck today, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry you got caught up in her mess. After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for a while, going through the files on the USB drive on my laptop. It was even worse than I had thought. Patricia and her brother had been running the premium slip scheme for 2 years, collecting over $30,000 in extra fees that went directly to her brother's company as maintenance costs. There were emails discussing which homeowners to target based on how likely they were to complain or fight back. One email made my blood boil. Patricia had written to her brother, "The new guy on Lakeview, Ellis, seems like he might be a problem, but he just moved here and doesn't know anyone. We'll hit him first and use him as an example. If we can get away with it, the others will fall in line." I saved everything to a secure backup and headed home to prepare for the meeting. The community center was packed by 2 o'clock. I counted at least 75 people, which was more than a third of the homeowners in Pine Lake Estates. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, looking nervous. When she saw me walk in, her jaw tightened. The meeting started with the usual formalities. Patricia gave a brief update on community finances, which was hilariously ironic given what I knew, and then opened the floor for new business. I raised my hand. I'd like to address the recent boat length policy and the Marina situation. Patricia's smile was forced. Mr. Ellis, if this is about your violation notice, that matter is being handled through the proper channels. Actually, it's about a lot more than that. It's about the HOA board violating state law, misappropriating funds, and implementing discriminatory policies against residents. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned bright red. Those are serious accusations, Mr. Ellis. I hope you have proof. I do. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. Let's start with the boat length policy. The board claims it was properly voted on and noticed to residents, but the meeting minutes show that the special meeting was only noticed 3 days in advance, not the 10 days required by Minnesota statute. That makes the vote invalid. Deborah interrupted. We sent an email to everyone. You sent an email to some people. Dozens of residents, including myself, never received it. And even if we had, 3 days isn't sufficient notice under the law. I pulled out the documents and handed copies to Patricia and the other board members. Here are the meeting minutes, the email logs showing the gaps in notification, and the relevant statute. The policy is invalid, and any fees collected need to be refunded. Patricia looked at the papers, her hand shaking. We'll look into this. There's more. The premium slips were built by a company owned by Patricia's brother. The contract was awarded without competitive bidding, which violates the HOA's own bylaws, and I have evidence that Patricia received kickbacks from the fees collected. The room erupted in angry voices. George Hoffman stood up and shouted, "Is this true, Patricia?" Of course not. This is slander. I held up the USB drive. I have emails, bank records, and text messages proving everything. Patricia has been using her position to enrich herself and her family at the expense of the community. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly. You have no right to make these accusations. I'll have you sued for defamation. Sue me. I'll see you in court with all of this evidence. Another homeowner, a woman I recognized from a few houses down, stood up. I want to see that evidence. If Patricia's been stealing from us, I want to know. I looked at the crowd. I'm happy to share everything with anyone who wants to see it. But there's something else you all need to know. The HOA doesn't own the marina or the lake bed. Those are private property. And as of 2 weeks ago, I'm the owner. That caused even more chaos. People started shouting questions at me and at Patricia. The other board members looked completely lost, clearly having no idea about any of this. I waited for the noise to die down, then continued. The HOA has an easement to use the lake bed and shoreline, but that easement has specific terms. The HOA is required to maintain the marina fairly and cannot implement discriminatory policies. By targeting specific homeowners with bogus violations, the board has violated the easement terms, which gives me the legal right to revoke it. A man in the back shouted, "What does that mean for the rest of us?" It means if the HOA doesn't fix this situation, I can shut down the marina and eliminate lake access for the entire community. But I don't want to do that. I moved here because I love the lake and I want to be part of this community. What I want is for the HOA to follow the law, treat all residents fairly, and stop the corruption. Patricia finally lost it. You're trying to blackmail us. You bought that property just to cause problems. No. I bought that property because my uncle owned it and offered to sell it to me. I didn't even know about the situation here until after the sale went through. But I'm glad I own it now, because it gives me leverage to force the board to do the right thing. Susan, who had been quiet until now, looked at Patricia. Did you really take kickbacks from your brother? Patricia didn't answer. She just grabbed her purse and walked out of the community center. Deborah and Susan stared at each other in shock. George stood up again. I move that we hold an immediate vote to remove Patricia Winters from the HOA board and elect a new president. The motion was seconded and passed with only 3 dissenting votes, all from Patricia's close friends. Deborah was elected as the interim president, and a committee was formed to review all of the evidence I had provided and determine what actions needed to be taken. After the meeting, at least 20 people came up to thank me and ask questions about the property situation. I explained that as long as the HOA followed the easement terms and treated residents fairly, I had no intention of interfering with anyone's lake access. I just wanted to make sure the corruption stopped. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The HOA hired an independent attorney to review the marina contract and Patricia's conduct. The attorney confirmed everything I had alleged and recommended that the HOA file a complaint with the county attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Patricia tried to fight back by hiring her own lawyer and threatening to sue me, the HOA, and several other homeowners for conspiracy and defamation. Her lawyer sent a letter demanding that I transfer the lakebed property back to the HOA for $1 or face litigation. I responded with a letter of my own, laying out all of the evidence against Patricia and explaining that any lawsuit would result in a countersuit for abusive process and malicious prosecution. That's when things took a darker turn. One night in late June, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. I grabbed my phone and called 911, then carefully made my way downstairs. Someone had thrown a brick through my living room window. Tied to the brick was a note that read, "Drop this or you'll regret it." The sheriff's deputies arrived within 10 minutes. They took photos, collected the brick and note as evidence, and filed a report. I mentioned the situation with the HOA, and one of the deputies, a young woman named Officer Martinez, said they had been expecting something like this. "Patricia Winters has a history," she said. "Nothing criminal, but she's known for being vindictive. We'll increase patrols around your house and keep an eye on things." The next morning, I got a call from Deborah, the interim HOA president. "Zachary, I heard about what happened last night. The board wants you to know that we're horrified and we fully support you. We've also decided to formally ban Patricia from all HOA property, including the Marina and Community Center." Thanks, Deborah. I appreciate that. There's something else. The attorney we hired found more irregularities. Patricia apparently approved several other contracts with vendors who have connections to her family. The total amount of questionable spending is over $100,000. I whistled. That's felony territory. I know. We're meeting with the county attorney next week. I wanted to give you a heads up because you'll probably be asked to provide your evidence. The meeting with the county attorney happened on a Thursday morning. I met with Assistant County Attorney Robert Moss in his office in Grand Rapids. He was a serious man in his 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Ellis, thank you for coming in. I've reviewed the materials provided by the HOA board, and I have to say, this is one of the more blatant cases of HOA fraud I've seen. The problem is proving criminal intent. What do you need?" Testimony from Patricia's brother would help. If he's willing to admit that the kickback arrangement existed and that Patricia knew about it, we can probably get a conviction for theft by swindle and misconduct of a public officer. Her brother's not going to cooperate. He's in this just as deep as she is. Maybe, but he's also facing potential charges himself. If we offer him immunity in exchange for testimony, he might flip. The county attorney's office moved forward with the investigation. Patricia's brother, whose name was Thomas Brennan, was brought in for questioning and immediately asked for a lawyer. When the county attorney offered him immunity for his testimony against Patricia, he initially refused. But after his lawyer explained that he was likely going to prison either way unless he cooperated, Thomas agreed to talk. His testimony was damning. He admitted that Patricia had approached him 2 years ago with the idea of building premium slips at the Marina. She had pushed the project through the HOA board by inflating the cost estimates and claiming it was necessary for safety reasons. Thomas had then kicked back 20% of the contract amount to Patricia through a series of cash payments and gifts, including a $10,000 loan that was never repaid. With Thomas's testimony and the documentary evidence, the county attorney filed criminal charges against Patricia in August. She was charged with 3 counts of theft by swindle, 2 counts of misconduct in office, and 1 count of tampering with public records. The tampering charge related to meeting minutes that had been altered to remove references to competitive bidding requirements. Patricia was arrested at her home on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there, but George Hoffman called me right after it happened. They just took her out in handcuffs. There's news vans and everything. The story made the local news that evening and was picked up by some of the Twin Cities stations the next day. The headline was, "Pine Lake Estates HOA, President Arrested for Fraud." The story detailed the charges and mentioned that the investigation had been triggered by complaints from homeowners about discriminatory policies. My name wasn't mentioned in the initial reports, which I was grateful for. But it didn't take long for reporters to start asking questions. One persistent journalist from the Grand Rapids Herald found out about my role and called me asking for an interview. "Mr. Ellis, sources tell me you were instrumental in uncovering the fraud at Pine Lake Estates. Is that accurate? I'd rather not comment on an ongoing criminal case." "Fair enough, but can you confirm that you own the lake bed beneath the marina?" "That's public record. You can verify it at the county courthouse." "And is it true that you threatened to shut down the marina?" "I never threatened anyone. I simply explained the legal situation and asked the HOA to follow the law. Everything I did was proper and legal." The article came out 2 days later under the headline, "New Homeowners Property Discovery Exposes HOA Corruption." It was mostly accurate, though it made me sound more heroic than I felt. I had just been protecting my own interests and enforcing the law. Patricia's first court appearance was in September. She pleaded not guilty to all charges and was released on bond with the condition that she stay away from Pine Lake Estates. Her lawyer, a slick-looking guy from Minneapolis, gave a statement to the press saying that Patricia was the victim of a witch hunt and that the charges were politically motivated. The trial was scheduled for January, but as the months went on, it became clear that Patricia's case was falling apart. Thomas Brennan's testimony was corroborated by bank records and emails. Other HOA board members testified that Patricia had misled them about the Marina project and had blocked their attempts to review contracts. Even Daniel Winters, her soon-to-be ex-husband, testified about conversations where Patricia had discussed the kickback arrangement. In December, Patricia's lawyer approached the county attorney about a plea deal. She would plead guilty to 1 count of theft by swindle in exchange for dropping the other charges. She would be required to pay full restitution to the HOA, which by then had been calculated at $137,000, and serve 2 years of probation. The HOA board voted to accept the plea deal. It wasn't perfect, but it meant Patricia would have a felony conviction on her record, would have to pay back everything she stole, and would never be able to serve on an HOA board again. The county attorney also filed a civil forfeiture action against the $10,000 loan from Thomas, which meant Patricia would have to pay that back as well. The plea hearing was held just before Christmas. I attended along with several other homeowners. Patricia stood before the judge and admitted that she had accepted kickbacks from her brother and had used her position on the HOA board to approve fraudulent contracts. She apologized to the community, though it sounded hollow and rehearsed. The judge accepted the plea and imposed the agreed-upon sentence. He also gave Patricia a stern lecture about abusing positions of trust and betraying her neighbors. "Ms. Winters, you were elected by your community to serve their interests, not your own. You violated that trust in the most fundamental way. While this court is accepting the plea agreement, I want you to understand the seriousness of your actions. You're fortunate that you're not going to prison." After the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse with George and some of the other homeowners. It felt anticlimactic after everything that had happened, but there was also a sense of relief that it was finally over. "Think she'll actually pay the restitution?" George asked. "She doesn't have much choice. If she doesn't, she'll violate probation and go to prison. Plus, the HOA has a civil judgment against her. They can garnish her wages and put liens on any property she owns." "Good. She deserves worse, but at least she's not getting away with it." Meanwhile, life at Pine Lake Estates had been slowly returning to normal. The new HOA board, with Deborah as president and several newly elected members, had been working to clean up the mess Patricia left behind. They rescinded the boat length policy and refunded all of the premium slip fees. They also implemented new financial controls and transparency measures to prevent future corruption. As for the lakebed property, I worked out a formal agreement with the HOA. I transferred the easement to a renewable 30-year term with clear language about resident rights and HOA obligations. In exchange, the HOA paid me a nominal annual fee of $1,000, which was mostly symbolic, but established that I retained ownership while giving the community security of access. The agreement also included provisions that if the HOA ever violated the terms, I had the right to revoke the easement after a 90-day cure period. It was a safeguard that protected both me and the homeowners from future board corruption. By the time spring arrived, the whole incident had become part of Pine Lake Estates lore. New residents heard the story of how Patricia Winters had tried to shake down a new homeowner and ended up with a felony conviction. It served as a cautionary tale about HOA board power and the importance of oversight. My pontoon boat remained in its original slip, and I spent many peaceful evenings on the lake that summer. I'd made good friends in the community, particularly George, and several other homeowners who had been targeted by Patricia's schemes. We formed a loose association of boat owners who met regularly to grill burgers and swap fishing stories. One afternoon in July, about a year after the whole thing started, I was out on the pontoon with George when he asked me a question I had been expecting for a while. "Zachary, why didn't you just sell the lakebed back to the HOA? You could have made a fortune. I'm sure they would have paid way more than what you paid your uncle." I watched a family of loons swim past the boat and thought about my answer. I could have, but that wasn't the point. I didn't buy the property to make money. I bought it because my uncle offered it to me, and then I realized it gave me leverage to fix a corrupt system. If I had sold it back to the HOA, there would be nothing stopping a future board from pulling the same kind of stunts Patricia did. "So you're keeping it as insurance?" "Exactly. As long as I own it, the HOA has to think twice before implementing unfair policies, and if they do step out of line, the homeowners have recourse through me. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than nothing." George nodded. "That makes sense, though I bet it drove Patricia crazy that you wouldn't sell it to her." "Oh," she tried. "Her lawyer sent me 3 different offers before the criminal charges were filed. Started at $50,000 and went up to $120,000. I turned them all down." "Because you didn't want her to have control?" "Because she would have used it to retaliate against everyone who stood up to her. She would have revoked the easement out of spite and destroyed the entire community just to prove a point. Some people can't handle having power, and Patricia was one of them." We fished in comfortable silence for a while after that. The lake was calm, the sun was warm, and life was good. I had moved to Pine Lake Estates looking for peace and quiet, and after a year of chaos and legal battles, I had finally found it. The following October, I attended the annual HOA meeting where the board presented the financial report for the year. The difference from Patricia's tenure was remarkable. Every expense was documented, every contract had been competitively bid, and the HOA's reserves were actually growing instead of being drained by fraudulent schemes. During the meeting, Deborah announced that the board wanted to do something special to recognize the homeowners who had helped expose the corruption. She called me up to the front of the room along with George and Daniel Winters. "These 3 men played crucial roles in protecting our community," Deborah said. Zachary Ellis discovered the property situation and had the courage to challenge an illegal policy. George Hoffman rallied residents and made sure everyone understood what was at stake. And Daniel Winters provided the evidence we needed to prove wrongdoing even though it meant exposing his own wife's crimes. On behalf of every homeowner at Pine Lake Estates, thank you. The room erupted in applause. It was an emotional moment, and I felt genuinely touched by the recognition. Not because I wanted praise, but because it showed that the community understood what had happened and appreciated the effort to make things right. After the meeting, I walked back to my house under a clear autumn sky. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and the lake reflected the sunset in perfect stillness. My pontoon boat sat in its slip, right where it belonged. I thought about everything that had happened since I moved to Pine Lake Estates, the violation notice that started it all, the research that uncovered Patricia's corruption, the confrontation at the Marina, the criminal investigation and trial. All of it had been stressful and time-consuming, but in the end, it had been worth it. I had protected my rights as a homeowner. I had helped expose corruption that was hurting the entire community. And I had made sure that future residents wouldn't face the same kind of abuse and intimidation that Patricia had tried to use against me and others. Most importantly, I had learned something about the power of information and leverage. Patricia had assumed she could bully me because I was new to the community and didn't know anyone. She had counted on me backing down rather than fighting. What she hadn't counted on was that I had the knowledge, resources, and determination to stand up to her. The lakebed property had given me leverage, but knowledge of the law and willingness to use it had been just as important. If I hadn't known about the notice requirements for HOA meetings, or the easement terms, or the bidding requirements for contracts, Patricia might have gotten away with her schemes. Information had been my most powerful weapon. As I sat on my deck that evening with a cold beer in hand, I realized that the whole experience had taught me something else too. Communities are only as good as the people who lead them, and those leaders need to be held accountable. HOA boards have tremendous power over people's homes and lives, and without oversight and transparency, that power can be easily abused. Patricia Winters had abused her power because she thought she could get away with it. She had counted on apathy and ignorance to shield her from consequences. But when homeowners paid attention, asked questions, and demanded accountability, the corruption had been exposed and stopped. I made a promise to myself that night that I would stay involved with the HOA. Not as a board member, at least not yet, but as an engaged resident who attended meetings and paid attention to what the board was doing. I would be a voice for transparency and fairness, making sure that what happened under Patricia's leadership never happened again. The years that followed proved that promise was worth keeping. The HOA at Pine Lake Estates became known as one of the best-run communities in northern Minnesota. Property values increased, residents were happy, and the Marina remained a beautiful and well-maintained amenity that everyone could enjoy equally. Patricia Winters finished her probation and moved away from the area. I heard through George that she had relocated to somewhere in Arizona, far from the community she had tried to exploit. Her brother Thomas closed his construction company and took a job working for someone else. Daniel Winters got his divorce, remarried a nice woman he met at a hiking club, and remained friendly with many of the Pine Lake Estates residents. As for me, I continued to enjoy my retirement in the house on Lakeview Drive. I spent my days fishing, reading, and occasionally consulting on real estate matters for friends and neighbors. My pontoon boat, the one that had started the whole mess, remained in its standard slip, a reminder of how one person standing up for their rights can make a difference. I never regretted buying the lakebed property from Uncle Ray, and I never regretted using that leverage to fight the HOA's corruption. It had been the right thing to do, not just for me, but for every resident of Pine Lake Estates. Sometimes standing up to bullies is difficult and expensive and time-consuming, but it's always worth it. On quiet summer evenings when I was out on the pontoon watching the sunset, I would sometimes see new residents moving into the community. Young families with kids, retirees like me looking for peace and quiet, people chasing the same dream of lakefront living that had brought me to Pine Lake Estates. I hoped they would never have to face the kind of corruption and abuse that I had encountered. But if they did, I hoped they would remember the story of Patricia Winters and the HOA that tried to ban my pontoon from the lake. I hoped they would remember that knowledge is power, that leverage matters, and that one person with the courage to stand up can change everything. Most of all, I hoped they would remember that communities work best when leaders serve the people, not themselves. The lake remained calm, the marina remained open, and life at Pine Lake Estates continued in the way it was always meant to be, fair, peaceful, and accessible to everyone who called it home. And my pontoon boat, the catalyst for a revolution nobody saw coming, sat proudly in its slip, a testament to the simple truth that sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest acts of defiance. Years later, when people asked me about what happened, I would tell them the truth. I didn't set out to be a hero or to take down a corrupt HOA board. I just wanted to use my boat and enjoy the lake. But when I was pushed, I pushed back harder. And when I discovered I had leverage, I used it not just for myself, but for everyone. That's the real lesson of the story. It's not about owning property or knowing the law or even about defeating corrupt officials. It's about understanding that every person has power, and that power is most meaningful when it's used to protect not just yourself, but your entire community. Patricia Winters forgot that lesson, and it cost her everything. I remembered it, and it gave me something far more valuable than money or property. It gave me a home where I truly belonged, surrounded by neighbors who knew they could count on me, just as I could count on them. The pontoon still sits in that same slip today, ready for the next sunset cruise, the next fishing trip, the next peaceful evening on the water. And every time I climb aboard and push away from the dock, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well, knowing you did the right thing, and enjoying the lake that nobody, not even the most determined HOA president, could take away from you.